Hello, welcome back. Fred in the shed, or Fred up in the shack. Right, going to do a bit of a controversial video this time. We're going to talk about linear amplifiers, burners as they were known back in the day. Now these little devices have got a pretty bad reputation and it's not all that justified nowadays, but it is justified back in the day. Anyone that was on CB radio back in the day remembers the absolute misery of living in a street where I was, and then a guy at the end of my street went out and bought a massive great burner, something like a 200 watt burner, and then that was it. He would basically be able to talk over everyone. So then someone further on down the road, they went out and they bought a 350 watt burner and then a 400 watt, 500 watt. And in the end, people were running ridiculously large amounts of power. It's playing music on the 1.9 or the 1.4 in those days on the calling channel. And you just couldn't get out. You know, you was on 4 watts, you were completely wiped out. So it became a massive, like, kind of, I don't know, testosterone, ego, male kind of thing. You know, let's see how much power we can put out. And it got totally crazy. Got these things a bad reputation. Today, 2018, I don't think it's much of a problem, not round here anyway, on sort of CB. All people I speak to, pretty much everyone runs a little bit of power, whether it's they're running these 10 metre radios that have been tuned for 11 metres, or they're running a little bit of a linear, but it's not really a problem. No one is really trying to get over anyone anymore. Where these get a bad reputation nowadays is actually on sideband. If you go on to the say the 27555, for example, in Italy there is absolutely no regulations to how much power you can run, so consequently you've got Italian stations running 1 kilowatt, sometimes 2 kilowatts of power, absolutely wiping everybody else out. So you'll get the Italians on the 555 kind of literally, when they came on, they literally take over. And it's very frustrating, especially for radio operators. Now ham operators themselves shouldn't really be on the 555 because it's a kind of not a ham band, but they get frustrated with CB users using power, and it causes a lot of bad feelings. So I'm going to do this anyway, but please do not, you know, hammer me with loads of sort of arsey comments about shouldn't be using linear amplifiers, they're illegal, all the rest of it, could bring in the hobby of radio into disrepute, all the rest of it. It's a reality. You know, people in 2018 are pretty much everyone's running a little bit of power. We have to live with it and get over it. Okay, that's what I'm saying about that. So, right, for the newbies that are watching, thanks very much for watching. Yeah, what linear amplifier? It's an amplifier. It boosts your transmit signal. It won't do anything for your receive signal, but it will boost your transmit signal. Now, for a newbie, if you've got yourself, we'll say, a small little basic, you know, legal CB radio, and you're not getting heard as well as you would like, before you go spending any money on increasing your signal strength, look at your antenna. If you've got, we'll say, a mobile antenna, for example, and that's stuck outside of your house on a guttering, or you've sort of stuck it, you know, on a short pole or something, look to be improving your antenna. Even if you buy a £30 silver rod antenna, stick it on a pole, stick that on the side of your house, even if it's low. Or if you can't do that, as I've said before, get yourself a 3 metre aluminium pole, stick that in the ground in your garden, or put it in one of those aluminium or cast iron umbrella stands that I started with, and use a base station antenna. You will get massive more gains by using a proper base station antenna, even if it's only 3 metres from the ground at the bottom of your garden, and you will do by buying yourself a linear amplifier. That is not the answer. So spend the money on your antenna first. Also, if you've got a little bit extra money to spend, maybe look at your coaxial cable. You might be running RG58, and that's absolutely fine, but you can upgrade that to, say, sort of 213 or Mini 8, something like that. That also will improve your transmit signal, and hopefully it will improve your receive. Another thing to look at as well is the connections that you've got from your radio. You might be going through 1 or possibly 2 little switch boxes. Each one of those switch boxes is probably going to reduce your transmit signal by 1 S point from receiver. So try and get a clean signal from your radio through to your antenna. Look at your system first, your setup, before you think about buying a linear amplifier. These are not the golden ticket. These are not the answer to all of your prayers. However, in saying that, they can help. They are useful. Now take this radio here, this is a Macom EM27, it's a 2797 rig. They don't make these anymore, but incidentally I've seen these up on eBay for really cheap actually. Seen these for about £25. They're a great little radio for that sort of money. It's not my favourite radio. I did make a video on this a little while ago, and when we get to the end I'll leave a little pop-up that will come up on the screen if you want to go and check that out. But it's not a bad radio, not by any stretch of the imagination. Now if you're running, say, 4 watts for example, even with a decent antenna, unless there's lots of stations around your vicinity, you are going to struggle a little bit, let's be honest about it. You know, especially with noisy conditions. For example, you might be talking to someone that's 12 miles away. Yeah, you'll get out there to 4 watts, you'll get to him, but you'll be giving him a low signal. Say you're about an S3. Now if he's got absolutely no noise, and yeah, he'll hear you absolutely fine, but the reality of today is that most people that have got home-based setups, there's a certain level of noise. So you know, he might have, for example, S4 of noise that particular day. You're hitting him with an S3 signal, he's struggling. You know, he's really having to work for it to try and make the sort of QSO, the conversation with you. If you've got a little small linear amplifier, say a 50-watt burner or something, yeah, if you switch that up, your signal might just jump to the S4, you might just make it up to S5, suddenly he can hear you. So it has got uses. It will help you if you're running a little 4-watt CB. If you use a linear amplifier, yeah, definitely you will get heard. If you're using sort of other radios, for example, if you say you've got a Grant 2, Grant 2's 12 watts SSB, again under clear conditions. I've proved it when I use my one. Under clear conditions, you know, you get 20-25 mile local contacts, absolutely no problem. When the DX comes in, you know, you'll get out. I've done it. Got out to stateside on this. You will get out no problem with the Grant 2. The only thing a linear will help you when you're trying to shoot DX, and that's again for the new guys, that's when you're trying to talk to foreign stations. Obviously when the band's open, for example, there's a lot of stack up, so there's a lot of signals, a lot of stations all trying to get into one guy. Now again, you know, if you're on the 12 watts, yeah, you're probably making a trip, but whether you're actually being heard over the others, that's another sort of story. If you then switch on a little linear, then you become slightly louder. They're going to respond to the loudest voice, unfortunately. It's just a sort of way of the way sort of nature is, but they're going to respond to sort of the loudest voice. So again, getting heard on the DX pile-up, yeah, if you can run a little bit of power for that, I think that will help you. The other radios, if you're using a 10-meter radio, like the 6900 here or the 9900, you shouldn't really need a linear amplifier. I don't use a linear amplifier on my 6900. I got out to Corsica Island on video the other day, absolutely no problem at all. The 9900, it's more than powerful. In fact, I think it's too powerful. You know, sideband, 60 watts out the back of that, absolutely no problem at all. So why have I got a linear amplifier? I'm actually going to be using it on my 9900, but I'm not going to be using it to create more power. I don't need any extra power. The reason is that on my 9900 a few weeks ago, I was having a really great chat to Jim, Charlie Tango 2444, and it was just us on the band, and the 305 net had ended, and we had time, we just carried on, and we chatted all about his hobbies. He's got some wonderful hobbies, that guy. And I was doing sort of 2.5-3 minute overs, you know, which is quite a long time, and then suddenly the 9900 started bleeping. I was getting an error message on the screen. It may have been high SWR or something like that, and when I reached behind the back of that 9900 and I touched the radio, it was too hot to touch. It was absolutely blisteringly hot. You could have cooked bacon on it, it was that hot. And the power control on the 9900, I had been running it pretty much full power, so obviously I backed it right off, but it did kind of worry me a little bit. These 9900s do run very hot, and so I thought, well, for what it costs, I'm going to get myself a little linear amplifier, and I'll return the 9900 right down to its minimum setting. Now with the power RF control on the minimum setting, it's around about sort of 3.5 watts, something like that, and then that into a linear amplifier. It gives me sort of 40-50 something out the back, and that's absolutely fine. What I'll do actually, while I'm thinking about it, At the end of this video, when I've had a little chat with you, I'll take this downstairs and I'll run the Macon EM27. I'll run that into the linear, into a dummy load, and we'll just see what we get out of it. Now, another thing is when you come to buy these, now I've got to be honest, I bought this one second hand. It's a second one that I've bought second hand. I'm not sure if I really recommend it buying these second hand. You take a hell of a risk, to be honest. These are very easy to damage by overpowering them, putting too much power into the back of these. People, you know, always try and push them too hard. Now, if you've got a little 4 watt radio, like the little EM27 here, 4 watts into the back of these is absolutely ideal. They work, you know, completely fine. It's when you get onto sideband, a lot of the manufacturers say that this one, and also which is the 150 and the KM203, it will take 10 watts. And yeah, it might take 10 watts, but it's very difficult to judge the power output on your radio, especially if you're not using into a dummy load, if you're using to an antenna, and it's very easy to overdrive the radio. Before you know it, you're putting in 15, sometimes 20 watts, and you burn them out. I've burnt a couple out, not by doing that, but just by forgetting they're in line and just using the radio on full power. Before you know it, they're burnt out. So you can buy these sort of second hand. To be honest, I paid £22 for this boxed from eBay, and it's been absolutely fine. And the previous one that I bought, I think I paid £25 UK. They're not all that expensive new, typically around about sort of 45 for the KM203. The Zetagi a little bit more expensive, maybe about 55 or 60 pounds. They have their uses. If you're new to CB radio, you know, they're not the answer to all of your prayers. If you've got a radio and someone says, oh yeah, get yourself a 200 watt burner, no, get yourself your antenna sorted out. And that's another thing with the power of these burners, what the manufacturers claim. Now this, for example, I think they claim 100 watts on FM, 200 watt sideband. You're not going to get anything like that out of a small burner like this. That is in laboratory conditions, played with a consistent tone from a tone generator. In reality, we'll have a look downstairs, but in reality, you put 4 watts into this, I reckon you probably get 50 or 60 out on FM. On sideband you might get a little tiny bit more, maybe 60, 70 watts at a peak, but most of the time on sideband, if you're talking at a usual distance from the mic, you're probably looking at 40 to 50 watts, and that's absolutely fine. That's all you really need. Typically with my Yaesu 450, for example, I'll be running that on 40 watts on sideband. And as a test, last week we was chatting on the 305, and I had Paul Charlie Tango Mike, I think it's 935, and he's in Luton, so he's just over the 20-mile point from him, and I'm running sort of say 40 watts out there. And I said to him, well, Paul, I'm going to turn the power right up, I'm going to crank it right up on the 450 and keep an eye on your signal meter. So I went from 40 right up to 95, and you know what, 1S point on his meter, and my signal jumped, I think, from an S3 to an S4. So that's more than double the power. So, you know, don't think that if you run if you're running 4 watts and then you run 100, you know, you're going to almost sort of get 20 times the amount of power. You're not. Honestly, it just doesn't work like that. So they'll help you, but it's, you know, don't just whatever they say on the box, you know, sort of take that with a pinch of salt. Anyway, okay, going to go downstairs, do a bit of testing on this just to sort of finish this video up. And but anyway, cheers, thanks for watching the intro. Please don't hammer me in the comments because I'm talking about amplifiers. Let's do a little test, see what we get. Right, so here we are. Nothing too technical, it's a little bit basic, but let's just run through it. So to start with here, we've got the Sharman Multicom 30 amp little mini power supply. I reviewed this on a video a little while ago. Now you've got to think about your power supply if you're going to run a small linear, because the linear itself will probably typically draw 10 to 12 amps. We'll check that in a minute, but that's on top of what you're going to be using for your CB radio, and ideally you should really have 2 separate power supplies. Don't run them both off of one supply. So, you know, you're looking probably at about a 20 amp power supply to run the two together sort of safely. But anyway, there's the 30 amp supply. Then we've got the Macom EM27. Then I've got another Zetagi TM999 power meter. There's the little 150 linear, and then finally we're running that into a dummy load which was sent to me by Gary a while ago. So cheers, thanks for that, Gary. So anyway, right, next thing we'll zoom into the power meter and let's see what we're getting out of the radio. So straight out of the little EM27 there we go, key up, and yeah, as you can see on the 10 meter scale there, just under the 5 watts. For all intents and purposes, that's putting out sort of 4 watts. So 4 watts going into the amplifier. So I'm now going to put the amplifier on. I'm going to change this to the 100 scale and let's see what we get. Yep, and there you go, that's past the 50, so that's about 60 watts, which is pretty much what I thought you'd get. So I'll just do that once more. There you go, 60 watts. So 4 watts into the little linear gives you 60 out, which isn't a bad, that's not a bad power. That's probably about what you would sort of typically need. Of course, you're not going to get the 100 watts that is claimed. Okay, finally, let's look at the amps now. Let's see how much that linear does actually put on your power supply. So here we are, zoomed into the power meter. Now with the radio just receiving, you'll notice that the needle is barely on the scale. That's probably only about a quarter of 1 amp. Right, we're going to just sort of key the radio up now. And there you go, just under the 2 amps. So just sort of gives you an idea what the radio sort of uses just on its standard 4 watts there. Right, okay, next time I'm now going to switch on the linear amplifier and let's see how far we are close to that 10 amps. And just fraction over the 8, so probably about an 8 1/3 amps, something sort of like that. So yeah, you know, I suppose in theory you probably get away with a 15 amp sort of supply. If you're on sideband, for example, you're going to be pushing that linear a little bit harder. So if it's doing 8 watts or just over 8 watts on FM, in theory that's going to go up quite a bit when you go to sideband. So right, going to bring this one to a close. Hope it's useful, certainly for those guys that you know, are starting out, might be thinking of boosting their signal with an amplifier. But as I said, you know, for the 3rd time in saying it, look at your setup first, antenna, coax, things like that. These aren't the answer to all of your prayers. Okay, as always, thank you very much for your time. Cheers, thanks for watching. I will put a few little pop-ups at the end of this video. Your views are always welcome on Fred in the Shed, and if you want to get notifications and see other videos that I'm going to be putting up very shortly, then just hit that subscribe button. But as for now, as always, cheers, thanks for your time, thanks for watching, and of course, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.